everyone, today I thought I would sit and talk about my experience of breastfeeding my 3 children. I have touched on this channel before, so although this channel is predominantly about writing and reading and bookish stuff, if you're new to this channel, my first book was all about breastfeeding, my book Milk. It's actually about my experience of breastfeeding my children, and then every other chapter is something like history or biology or sociology to give like a broader context of what breastfeeding is like in our society and why it's like that. And so when I was bringing that book out, I made one video in particular where I talked about why I was so passionate that I had sat and written an entire book. And in that video I did talk a little bit about my own experience, but I'm not entirely sure, but I think I may have still been feeding my youngest when I made that video. I'm not sure. But other than kind of touching on the fact that I'm passionate about it, or I made a video once where I recommended some books about breastfeeding, yes, definitely something I have mentioned, but I haven't really sat down and talked about my experience. But the other thing as well is that when I set this channel up, I had already had my 3 kids, so I didn't make all that content about being pregnant and breastfeeding and like monthly updates and all of that stuff. I just, I'd already had my children, and it's something I'm really, really passionate about, early parenting, and I'm fascinated by it as well. So yeah, I realised it was something I hadn't talked about. And then with everything kind of moving along with my new book, which is also about breastfeeding, so it's a children's picture book that explains breastfeeding, with that kind of moving along, and so at the moment I've got a Kickstarter running, which is, it's only got a couple of days left as this video goes up, so that's kind of wild. If you want to find out more about that book, then that link is the best place to go to find out the whole story behind it. But I've been doing promotional stuff for that, and so I've been talking about my own experience, or talking about, why normalising breastfeeding is really important. So I've been on local radio talking about it, and it makes you reflect on your own experiences. And also on top of that, I am actually training to be a breastfeeding counsellor, so that, again, sometimes the actual things that you're doing make you reflect on your experience, but other times when you learn something, it makes you think, oh, you think back, was that what happened to me? Or, oh, I wonder what would have happened if XYZ had happened instead, or, always just brings it back to your own experience. And of course, my own experience is central to why I'm so passionate about it and why I've ended up writing about it, because until I had breastfed, I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what on earth I would write about. And it was only the fact that this was something that just I was so passionate about, that I sat and wrote this book, my first book, Milk, that it's changed my life. It's made me into a writer. I was a teacher before this. So yeah, it is pretty central actually to all of this, to this channel, to what I do now, to all of the stuff. So it is something I've been thinking about a lot, as I say, because of the new book coming out. So, and it occurred to me that I hadn't really sat down. Sorry, I'm a bit hoarse. I've got a bit of a cold. Also, I had my COVID injection yesterday, and so I'm a bit not 100%. But yeah, sorry, I'm just a little bit croaky. Yeah, so what was I saying? Yeah, it occurred to me that I hadn't really sat down and talked about my experience breastfeeding, because if I had had this channel back when I had my children, I would have done this kind of in updates about how my children were, I suppose, I don't know. But yeah, it's content I've never really made, and it's something that is so important to me, and I think really helpful for other people, just to hear about other people's experience, even if it's really different to your own. It just, it helps you feel like there's somebody else out there. It just helps you feel less alone, and it helps, I just think the more stories there are, the better. Anyway, look, I could ramble about the normalisation of breastfeeding and the sharing of stories forever. The point of this video is that I was going to talk about my own experience. So, I am going to start at the beginning, because that seems like a sensible place to start. That's not how the song goes. Right, when I was pregnant with my son, so he was born in 2010. When I was pregnant with him, I thought that breastfeeding was just something that you decided whether you wanted to breastfeed or formula feed. I just thought, it was like, yeah, I'll do that one. That one sounds like the right one for me. I didn't really, even though I knew that lots of people had said to me, oh, I was only able to breastfeed for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or, you know, my mum or my mother-in-law or people I knew, it hadn't really sunk in that it was anything beyond you choosing what you wanted to do and then you doing it and then seeing how it goes. I just didn't realise there was anything more. So I made that decision. I actually had an antenatal class about breastfeeding, which was really lucky because that's something that isn't often on offer. So I was really lucky I had that available when I had him. But anyway, my pregnancy with him was really straightforward. I wasn't one of those people that really love being pregnant. Some people just blossom when they're pregnant and they just love it. They love having the bump and they love it. It just wasn't me. I found all the little annoyances really annoying. So, although obviously there was aspects of it that I really loved, and feeling a baby kicking and all this stuff is amazing. But yeah, pregnancy in general, I wasn't one of those people that was just like absolutely loving this new thing, this new, I don't know, it's hard to explain. But however, I had a really straightforward pregnancy. So although I moaned a lot, I didn't really have very much to moan about. My labour, however, was very long, and on the face of it, it was fine. I do know people who've had experiences that were much trickier than mine, have had to, go through things that were just much more complicated. But I do think with anything really, something doesn't necessarily have to be really bad to make you feel shocked or traumatised, and I definitely, so I actually think I had PTSD for quite a long time, like birth-related PTSD. As I say, my birth actually was not that bad. It was long, it shocked me, but it wasn't, on the face of things, there weren't really any complications or anything like that. So when I had my son, so I'd been in labour for, 30 odd hours or something, I was exhausted and I was feeling quite sort of shocked, and I lost quite a lot of blood, not like, dangerous amounts, but I was quite spacey, and just feeling, and very emotional, and the whole thing had been a lot, basically. And what I wanted to do when he was born, what I'd intended, was for him to do the breast crawl. So that's where you kind of lay back or lean back and the baby's placed on your tummy, and it's amazing. I've seen videos of it, and the baby can kind of just crawl their way and find your breast and just latch on, and basically you don't do anything, and they find their way, and it helps them to learn, and it just sounds amazing. I really, really wanted to do that. It's like a really natural way of just putting the baby on you and letting them kind of nuzzle and find their way. I just think that's so cool. Actually, what happened was, once my son was born, they just kind of grabbed my breast, grabbed the baby, shoved him on, and went, there you go. The first thing is, I don't remember whether they asked my consent to do that. I don't think they did. But having somebody touch you after you've been through all of that as well is not cool. And also, that whole thing of all the babies placed on you and they find their way and they learn to breastfeed and you learn to breastfeed, having somebody else kind of facilitate the breastfeeding, put baby on breast, and you're just sat there like not involved, you haven't learned how to breastfeed, you haven't learned how to help a baby, how to guide them to latch on. That learning experience hasn't happened for either you or the baby. So I felt like, although I had breastfed, I was saying in my notes, I breastfed not long after giving birth, I felt like I just wasn't involved and that I hadn't breastfed at all. Like, I just, obviously I was there, but I just didn't feel like I knew how would she put the baby, how would that happen? How would she? So yeah, so I did technically feed him not long after birth, and then I was taken through to the maternity ward and kind of settled down, and my family all arrived. There's loads of people there, and I was really spacey. And then they all left, and I kind of made them leave. I wanted to just be on my own. I was just like, yeah, no, I'm fine, off you go. And then I was left with this baby. And that's one of the strange things. It's like you don't have somebody with you kind of guiding you on what you're supposed to be doing. So there's me and this baby, and this baby, he had a name. There's me and Finn. Finn wanted to have some milk. He started kind of, sucking on his hands and, grumbling a little bit. So I was like, okay, well, I've already breastfed, so I'll breastfeed this baby, and kind of picked him up and was like, tried to latch him on, and it didn't work. I couldn't do it. And I kept trying, and I was getting sweaty and panicky, and he was getting upset, and I was conscious that there are other people sharing the ward with me, and like, oh God, a baby's crying, and oh. So I thought, okay, I'll call the nurse. So I called the nurse, and the nurse came, and I was like, I can't do this, I need some help. And I don't know whether she was at the end of a shift and was really tired, and like, who knows what she had to put up with. Maybe she'd just got told off by her boss. Maybe, I don't know, but she was not in a good mood. She was really terse with me, didn't help me at all. And she left, and I just kind of was left feeling really desolate, really alone, really kind of, well, I still haven't fed this baby, and I don't, it's honestly how I felt. And I was really upset, and everything about what happened over the preceding couple of days, having the baby, or like everything that happened during the birth, how I felt, the hormones, just everything was just like wham and hit me, and I was a mess. I then decided that I would never ask for help again. And I just retreated. I tried everything to get Finn to feed, and eventually I managed to do it, and I was like, I don't need any of your help, I can just do this by myself. And so I just kind of worked on it and tried little things that had been said to me in that antenatal class, and just sort of, oh, that kind of worked, and I think that looks right, and I don't really know, and I don't know how long I should feed him for, and am I supposed to swap sides, and what do? I don't know. And I was there overnight because I'd asked to. They actually offered to discharge me almost straight away, and I was like, I should not be let out of this hospital yet. So I stayed overnight. He was born at midday, 12:34. I feel that's right. Yeah, it was 1, 2, 3, 4. It was 12:34. And oh, my foot's gone to sleep. And so he was born at 12:34, but I stayed. They wanted to discharge me in the evening, but I stayed. And in the morning, my husband came, and I was all like, I breastfed for almost a day, and was all proud of myself, and showed him like, look, this is breastfeeding. Look what I can do. And I was pretty proud of myself, because I was, nobody had helped me. And we went home, and continued to breastfeed, continued to look after Finn and get to know him. And within a very short space of time, I was really, really, really sore. And I started to get cracks, and it was bad. It was really, really quite bad. I was quite damaged. I also had something called the 60-second sizzle, which is quite common, where when you latch the baby on, it makes you go, and then it goes. You have to like brace yourself. I don't know why that happens, but it just seems to be a thing that people get, and I got it. But at least you see, if it's a 60-second sizzle, you can say, okay, it's going to be like a toe curling, oh, and it doesn't. So that's something some people get, but it tends to sort of disappear over the course of a few weeks. But if you know it's just going to be that initial moment, you can kind of, right, it will go, it's fine, brace yourself, it's gone, it's fine, and you can deal with that, especially if you know, this won't happen again, I'm really not speaking well today. This will only go on for a couple of weeks or days even, and then I won't feel it anymore. But when you've got pain that persists during a feed and after a feed, when you're really, really sore, you really don't want to feed the baby again. What you want to do is heal, but you have to feed the baby because they need feeding and you need to get your milk supply going. So if you don't feed them, then, well, they'll have to have formula, and then that will mean that your milk supply won't, and you just end up like, oh. If you're watching this video and you're not familiar with how breastfeeding works, it's sort of supply and demand. So you feed the baby, your body goes, oh, I need to make that much milk. And then you feed the baby again and your body's like, oh, okay, I need to make some more. And the more you feed, the more your body makes milk. And if you don't feed, then your body will down-regulate the amount of milk that it produces. So, you know, you want to feed, but it hurts. So I was in this spiral and I did not want to ask for help because I had asked for help in the hospital and that did not go well. So I basically resorted to the doctor of Google, thank goodness for the internet, and just looked up what a latch should look like. So there's an amazing breastfeeding support group here, and they're fab, but I thought that it was like a club for breastfeeding people and I hadn't got it, so I couldn't join the club yet. So rather than actually going and getting some help, I didn't. I just persevered and looked at pictures, looked at videos, read forums, got all the tips I could, got my husband to look. In the meantime, he was feeling that, you know what, this is upsetting you and this is painful, just stop, and didn't understand that I really, really wanted to breastfeed. I knew why breastfeeding is beneficial to me, to the baby. This was a relationship that I wanted. The environmental reasons are really important to me. There's a whole host of reasons why I wanted this to work. And the answer was not, a lot of people's suggestion was, well, give the baby a bottle, just stop. Like, it's okay, it's fine. And when it's not what you want, saying just stop isn't the answer. The answer is to help with the thing that you're struggling with. But, you know, the people around me didn't know how to help. They didn't know to force me to the breastfeeding group or to call the National Breastfeeding Helpline. They are amazing, by the way. I will link them below. They're amazing. People just didn't know what to do, and the only suggestion they could think of, well, is stop. Stop this. It hurts you. And it's really hard being inside of the feeling of, you know, wanting to do this thing, but the thing is hard and you're trying to be really strong and I will keep doing this and I'm going to just be really stubborn about this and keep going. And people outside going, why don't you stop? And you're going, I don't want to stop. It's very, very difficult. So anyway, ultimately, I did manage to get things working again. Now, I suspect, in retrospect, that he was tongue-tied. My third child was actually tongue-tied as well, and my nephew is tongue-tied, and it does often run in families. And back then, it wasn't something that was talked about in the way it is now. I didn't even hear about it until, I don't know, probably when my second child was born. I don't think I'd even heard of it. But looking back, the soreness I had and the damage I had, and he was fed all the time, he didn't gain weight very well, he was quite a noisy feeder, and looking back, I think, yeah, maybe he was tongue-tied, but it was something, so with my youngest, where she was tongue-tied, we never had it divided, because as she got older, it got better. So again, if you don't know about tongue tie, everybody has a tie underneath their tongue. You also have lip ties, and that's totally normal. But for some people, that tie is a bit tight, and so it restricts the movement of the tongue, or equally you can have lip ties too that restrict the way that the mouth works. And sometimes, so like with my daughter, my youngest, her tongue tie looked really bad. She had a heart-shaped tongue because the tip had been pulled in so much, but it didn't cause me any damage. We just had very exaggerated latches for breastfeeding. I was very careful about making sure she latched really well, and as she got older it seemed to, I don't know, stretch out. She compensated for it, I don't know, but it was never a massive problem I do suspect with my eldest that it was something along those lines. I never looked in his mouth to know, but he had, or I wouldn't have known what I was looking for. But in terms of it getting better, I think that that was probably why he just sort of got older, stronger. I don't know. But with tongue tie, like I say, sometimes it can look bad, but doesn't cause that much of an issue. And sometimes it can look like nothing and cause lots and lots of problems with breastfeeding. So it's more about function than the way that it looks. So anyway, I don't know, because it wasn't something that was ever talked about. It's just in retrospect. So anyway, by the time he was sort of a month old, things were better. I wasn't so damaged. I was kind of in the swing of things a bit more, and just continued breastfeeding. When he was about 3 months old, I had a real moment. I read The Politics of Breastfeeding, which I have recommended on this channel before, which talks about the history of breastfeeding and the things like commercial sort of advertising, things like formula and baby food and the impact of that, and economics, and it's really, really fascinating. But reading that made me realise that the lack of support I'd had, not in terms of people around me not caring, but just them not knowing what to do when I was in this state, and their only suggestion being, well, stop. That a lot of that was actually just like a social thing, and it wasn't my fault. The fact that I hadn't been exposed to breastfeeding, so I hadn't known how to latch a baby on or what to look for, or any little tips and tricks, like I had no idea. That's society. It's not my fault. It's not my fault that my experience was negative. It's not, it just is the product of society. And it made me, on one hand, feel relief that I hadn't done something wrong. And it also made me feel angry that we are told that breast is best, but that isn't backed up. I mean, breast is best is not a phrase that's really used anymore, because it's not a very helpful statement, because it suggests your breast isn't necessarily best for everybody in every scenario. But at the time, that was still a phrase that was being used. But if you suggest that, it's the way that you should go, it's the ideal, it's difficult to find a good word. It's the normal, it's the biological norm. But that's not backed up with support and education and information. You're just setting people up, not only to fail, but also to feel grief. And that's really wrong. Another book recommendation, Why Breastfeeding Trauma and Grief Matters. Really, really good book that explains that too. So I felt very cross. Why had I been set up to feel how I was feeling? Why had I, that wasn't fair. And that's when I started writing Milk. It started out as, the other aspect of it was that I had been told that breastfeeding was beautiful, wonderful, romantic. And when the reality of it was that at that stage I hadn't really had that experience at all, breastfeeding had been painful and sad, that I felt like I'd been, if I'd have been told, it can be really hard, but hang on in there, some people do have negative experiences, but you can get through it, and here's where the support is, and so you feel when you have a bad experience or a negative experience in any way, that's on you, because it's meant to be like, and so when it's not, that's really hard too. So all of that was what started my book Milk, which I then wrote over the period of a number of years. So anyway, I carried on breastfeeding pretty uneventfully. My daughter's just about to come down and interrupt. So then I carried on breastfeeding pretty uneventfully. I fed him for 15 months-ish, I think. And so, weaned him onto solids, all the things happened. Basically, I settled into it and I started to really love it. I loved those quiet moments at night, although I was very, very tired, and my children don't sleep. But I did have those moments sat with my baby and like, oh, he's just amazing, and this is amazing. I have grown his body with milk that I have made. This is incredible. Like, I did have those moments, absolutely. I also had moments where I was sat watching box sets. I watched Breaking Bad a lot. So there's that. And so yeah, things were much, much better. I became really passionate about breastfeeding. I started going to the support group. I was writing about it, I was reading about it, I was fascinated by it. So then, when he was about around age 1, I can't say exactly where, it might have been a bit before actually, I started to get something called breastfeeding aversion. Now, when I had him, I had no idea it was a thing, I didn't know it had a name, I didn't know anything about it, there was no information out there whatsoever. This is only what I know in retrospect, and actually I'm reading about it at the moment. This book is absolutely amazing. This is When Breastfeeding Sucks by Zainab Yate, which is about breastfeeding aversion. So the best way that I can explain aversion is that it feels icky. It's like where breastfeeding before, I couldn't have even told you that it felt like anything. Suddenly it felt like fingernails down a blackboard. Not all the time, but just some feeds. It felt like my skin was crawling, you know, that just like, ooh, and it makes you feel angry, it makes you just want to just stop it, but you have to feed the baby because the baby needs feeding. And it's like after everything that I went through in the early days, and then I've turned that around, had an amazing experience. Now why have I got this, where breastfeeding feels like horrible? And I'm somebody, I don't like the noises when people eat, and I'm also not a very touchy-feely person, so I felt really touched out. When I'm not a hugger, I'm someone who needs their personal space, and to then have a baby that wants to feed all the time, all night, is on you, I always joke that my children like want to crawl into my skin, like if they could get any closer to me. So you've got these kids that are on you all the time, cuddling you, clawing at you, or like all the time, all night. And you can't just say, I've had enough, can someone else deal with this? Because you're the one with the boobs that make the milk, so it's on you. Yeah, I very, very often felt very frustrated and had this like weird sensation. And so the best thing I can suggest is, if that's something, if you're watching this and think, I get that, have a look at, I will link it below as well, Breastfeeding Aversion, and look up this book, When Breastfeeding Sucks, because it's very, very good. So basically it's also hormonally linked, so I would struggle at certain times of the month, and I put up with it thinking, come on, you went through difficult times in the early days, you love breastfeeding, keep this going, you want to feed for 2 years, because the World Health Organization recommends you breastfeed exclusively for 6 months, so you don't give any other food, anything, and then after 6 months you breastfeed with food for 2 years and beyond. So I was like, you want to get to 2 years, keep on going with this, you can do it, you're stubborn, you can do this. And yeah, when he was about 15 months old, I was like, I can't do this anymore, and weaned him. And I felt bad, but breastfeeding is a two-way relationship, and weaning can come from the child or it can come from the parent. And for me, I just could not take any more because of this aversion, which, as I say, at the time I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I really didn't want to breastfeed anymore. So I stopped. So then, I don't know how much time it would have been before I fell pregnant with my second child. There's 2.5 years between them, so I don't know, do the maths. Not that long. Don't know. So I fell pregnant with her. My pregnancy with her was pretty, fine. And other than some hip problems, so I had pelvic girdle pain with my 2 girls. But other than that, fairly uneventful. Had an amazing birth at home, so she was born in there. She likes to show people, go, I was born here. Really, really amazing birth with her. And she was born before anybody. I don't know if my husband would say the same, because he actually delivered her. He's named as the midwife on the paperwork because the midwives didn't make it. She was born very fast and Stuart delivered her, so I think he would have a different take on this. But for me, it was a really, really amazing experience. And I was just left like at home when the midwives left and the paramedics left, because we had paramedics attend, just because it was an emergency, but it wasn't. It was like a routine thing. They had to come out, but we didn't need them. So it was just like, I felt all right. Pretty much straight after she was born, it was like, I feel fine, everything's all right. fed her. I'd fed a baby before, so it was like, oh yeah, this thing, that's cool. And honestly, the whole experience with feeding her was just fine. And so another important thing that happened was that the breastfeeding group that I'd attended with my son, while I'd been back at work in the interim period before having my daughter, they had had funding withdrawn and it was looking like they might close. And so I got a little bit involved, but I wasn't attending the group because I was at work. But I, trying to put my voice behind it. And ultimately, that group ended up reforming as an independent charity. So they're still running now. But when I went back to the group after having my daughter, I said to the lady who ran the group, what can I do? Because now that you're independent, like, I want to help. I wasn't involved in setting the charity up because I've been at work, like I say. And she said, why don't you do peer support training and you can be one of our peer supporters, which I did. So again, if you haven't come across a peer supporter, you don't just get them in breastfeeding, you get them in other kind of walks of life. The idea of a peer supporter is it's somebody who, so in breastfeeding, they've done a course about breastfeeding, about sort of the basics, so that they're able to offer information, they know where to find good information, and they can signpost to, good, reliable information and support and all the stuff. And they're also just somebody who can make a cup of tea and some biscuits and sit there and listen, because an awful lot of breastfeeding stuff is helped a lot by somebody who will sit and listen and empathise. Breastfeeding rates are really low, so a lot of people don't actually know other people that breastfeed, or not. As time goes on, it's less likely that you know someone who's still breastfeeding. So being able to go to a group and just be listened to by somebody who gets it, that goes a really long way. And I would say in any walk of life, if you have a friend who's going through something, the best thing you can do is tea and cake. I know tea and cake sounds really like dismissive, but there is something about being made a drink. I don't actually drink tea. I would throw it in your face. I wouldn't throw it in your face, it's hot. I'd wait for it to cool down and then I'd throw it in your face. So coffee for me, please. Make someone a drink and a cake with some biscuits. Food is important. It's just welcoming. Just sit down. Do you want a drink? Oh yeah, a biscuit. Right. Tell me about it. That is just like, whatever you're going through in life, there is something about that. My dad used to say, if somebody's in shock, give them fluids and warm them and all the stuff, unless they're British, and then give them some tea. Used to be one of his jokes. But in all seriousness, a hot drink and a chat does a lot. So yeah, a peer supporter. I digress massively. What a surprise. This is the rambliest video that ever was. So yeah, a peer supporter will literally offer just support, listening, but also knows how to point in the right direction, and will be able to look at, the basics of the baby breastfeeding. So I did that training and became a peer supporter while I was feeding my daughter. I fed her for about 19 months. I think she was the longest I fed a baby. Again, I had aversion. However, when I had her, I knew what it was. Now, I'm not sure of the timeline around when Zainab, the lady who wrote this book, started putting her content online, and it may have been that she was, so this would have been 2013 probably. So I'm not sure if she had started creating content, because Zainab is the only person talking about this, to be honest, and the resources she has online are incredible. And it's really common. So I managed a lot better because there was more information. I'm pretty sure that stuff was out there from her. So yeah, I had the same experience. So then, the same experience of aversion. Then I stopped breastfeeding, and we weren't going to have any more children. So the last feed was quite an emotional, like, this is the last time I will feed a baby. I've now decided to stop. It was a big deal. We weren't going to have any more. And then I started clearing through all the baby stuff, starting to sell it, and I couldn't cope with it. It made me really upset. I hid it all in the loft because I just couldn't bring myself to sell it. And I wasn't done. We weren't done. and we decided to have one more. So Zoe was born 4.5 years later. Yeah, as I say, it was a bit of a change of plan. And funny enough, once she was born, I sold all the stuff. Like, literally, as soon as she grew out something, I was like, get it out. Like, I was like, done. No more babies. Get the baby stuff out. So yeah, I'm very much done now. So when she was born, she was born in hospital, but again, it was quite an, not pleasant, that's not the right word, a positive experience of labour. There were lots of like really funny bits. Like, it was just, I look back on it with fondness with both of my daughters, my son not so much. My pregnancy was difficult. I had a lot of problems with my mobility. I had crutches for a little while because my hips were such a problem. So pregnancy was kind of rubbish, but nothing serious. Oh, well, I had really bad eczema, which actually scarred me at the time. The scars have gone now, but really, on my hands and feet, horrendous, like dermatitis, eczema, and I still have not great skin on my hands and feet. So that was quite annoying. I can remember I couldn't give out sheets at school because I couldn't split the sheets up because my fingers were all cracked. Delightful. So I had to get the kids to help me, things like that, because I couldn't like separate pieces of paper. Anyway, so but other than that, yeah, the pregnancy was fine. The labour was great. My waters broke at home, and they gave me 24 hours to have her. Otherwise, I had to go into hospital, and she took more than 24 hours. So I went into hospital, but had a really good experience. When we left, my husband was like, we can go. They said we can go. And I was like, no, we can't go. And he's like, why can't we go? I was like, because I've got lunch ordered. So anyway, so breastfeeding was going okay, but I spotted straight away that she had a tongue tie, because by then, I'm a peer supporter, and I hadn't released milk, but I'd written it. I was, really, really in all this, and I was like, she's got a tongue tie. So I rang my friend who's a breastfeeding counsellor. So breastfeeding counsellor is the next kind of step from peer supporter. They've done a 2-year course to be able to counsel, so have counselling skills around sort of listening and like helping people to achieve their goals, and also knowledgeable about breastfeeding. So I rang her and was like, can you come to my house today? And she had a look and sort of helped me with ideas for latching the baby, and we never had any problems. As I say, I just sort of took care when I fed her to avoid becoming injured. I'd say at the worst I was a bit sore, but nothing like with my eldest. Feeding her was wonderful. When she was little, I said to my husband, I'm becoming a hermit, but I don't want to go out. I just want to be at home. I really nested and just wanted to be in my bedroom with my baby and just not go anywhere, not do anything, and just sit and feed her and chill out. And I was also writing, so there was that. But yeah, I was just in my little world and was quite happy. I was like, I'm not going out like with my eldest because I can't cope with it and I feel too panicked. I'm not going out because I don't want to, because I'm really happy here. So it was like a different emotion around it. So yeah, feeding her was fine until the aversion hit again. And I really wanted, I was like, well, I fed the first for 15 months, the second for 19 months. So the third, I'll get to 2 years. I didn't get to 2 years. I got to about 18 months or so. Aversion is hard, and just got to a point where I was only feeding them once a day, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And breastfeeding is a 2-way thing, and I couldn't do it, just couldn't do it. And I don't hold any kind of guilt around that. It was what had to happen. I felt guilty after my first, but I think once I understood this is the thing, if you understand, so now I know what aversion is, I don't have a problem with the fact that ended our journey, because it's fine. When you think that you stopped because feeding your baby makes you want to crawl out of your own skin, that feels like something you should feel guilty about. But knowing that it's a thing, and a common thing, or relatively common, helped me to be fine with it, that I hadn't got to my goal. So I stopped feeding her, and I shall feed no more babies because I don't want any more. So we don't want any more. So yeah, and so that is that. And it's funny. You'd think I'd look back and maybe feel that, you know, my experience with my son was negative. It wasn't all negative, but the negativity made me who I am and changed my life. And so I don't look back on it anymore. At the time, I had, as I say, I had sort of PTSD surrounding some of it, and was very panicky and anxious and stuff. But I look back now and see it all as amazing, even the stuff that was hard at the time. So yeah, that is my experience of breastfeeding. And the point of all of that rambly long story really is that because I had a difficult experience with my first, it made me really, really passionate that people shouldn't feel like that. People shouldn't feel unsupported or lonely. I felt like I was the only person in the world that had ever breastfed. You know, I was so alone. I felt like nobody understood me. I didn't feel like that with my girls at all. You know, I felt like I had my village. I had a breastfeeding group. I knew loads of people that breastfed. My family knew lots more about breastfeeding, were far more, you know, knew what to say, things like that. And I didn't feel lonely, and I didn't feel isolated, and I didn't feel sad. And so I'm really passionate about the fact that actually, on the face of it, the things that happened with my eldest, I needn't have felt that way. I could have been supported through those issues if I'd have sought it out, and if I'd have been better informed and had people around me that sort of facilitated that more. I mean, it's always coulda, woulda, shoulda, but, you know, none of what I went through needed to have happened, or needed to have, you know, if he was tongue-tied, then sure, it may have had an impact, but it shouldn't have left me emotionally feeling how I did. When you go through tough times, whatever they are, feeling supported, not feeling alone, is so important. And that is why I am so passionate about breastfeeding. It's why I wrote Milk, because it's like, here's an experience, somebody else has been there. And also that it's not just the good, it's not just always this beautiful thing. Breastfeeding can be boring, it can be painful, it can be upsetting. It doesn't have to be perfect and, you know, rainbows all the time. And if you're not feeling the rainbows, then it's really great to have other people to go, yeah, no, I've been there, so it's okay. So, you know, it's part of why normalising breastfeeding, just talking about it normally, talking about it warts and all, talking, you know, making this video, talking about, bluntly, about my experiences, and it's why I write the things that I do, and why I you know, go and support a breastfeeding group and do all of that stuff, because I just passionately feel that breastfeeding should be boring. It should be something that, you know, it's just something that people talk about, but it's not particularly exciting. It's just a thing that happens, that isn't, like, it shouldn't be newsworthy. And that, like I said, people should just feel supported within their circle. So yeah, I could talk about that stuff for forever. So, and I think this video is already about 3 hours long, so I think I will probably stop there. Thank you for watching this video. Please do hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. Yeah.